Thank you all for coming out on this inclement evening. It's really appreciated. My name is Duncan White, and I convene the Writer Speak series for the Mahindra Humanities Centre. This evening, I am privileged to introduce Chigozie Obioma in conversation with Maya Jasanoff. Chigozie is one of the most brilliant and original authors at work today. Born in Akure, Nigeria, Chigozie is the author of 3 novels, the first of which, The Fisherman, was published in 2015. Set in the 1990s during Sani Abacha's rule, it is the story of 4 brothers torn apart by a prophecy of violence. The novel won numerous awards, including the Financial Times Emerging Voices Prize for Fiction, the LA Times' Award for First Fiction, and the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Debut Literary Work, and it was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize. His second novel, An Orchestra of Minorities, published in 2019, draws brilliantly on Igbo cosmology to weave an epic and tragic story that begins with a chance encounter but builds towards a tragic ending. The novel won the International Literaturpreis, and it too was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. His third novel, The Road to the Country, a historical fiction set during the Biafran War of the late 1960s, will be published in June. Get your pre-orders in. In 2015, the Journal of Foreign Policy named Chigozie one of the 100 leading global thinkers, and his work has had a truly global impact, being translated into more than 30 languages. Chigozie is the James E. Ryan Associate Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and this academic year is a distinguished writer in residence at the Shapiro Center at Wesleyan University. He also serves as a program director for the Oxbelly Writers Retreat in Greece, where I presume the weather is much nicer than it is here. As well as being shortlisted twice for the Booker Prize, Chigozie also served as a judge for that award in 2021, when the chair of the prize committee was none other than Maya Jasanoff. One of the writers they selected for the shortlist, Nadifa Mohammed, joined us this time last year, and the winner of the prize that year, Damon Galgut, has also been a guest of the Writers Speak series. Chigozie and Maya clearly have impeccable taste. Maya is the XD and Nancy Yang Professor of Arts and Sciences and Coolidge Professor of History here at Harvard, where she is also resident faculty at the Center for European Studies. Maya is the author of 3 extraordinary award-winning books of history. In Edge of Empire, she illuminated the history of the British Empire by exploring the perspective of art collectors. Liberty's Exile is a global history of the loyalists who fled revolutionary America, and her most recent book, The Dawn Watch, Joseph Conrad in a Global World, is a truly masterful account of how a rapidly changing world shaped a great writer. Before we begin, Chigozie is going to give a short reading from the new novel, which is very exciting. I would like you all please to just remember to silence your phones. There is going to be a opportunity for questions after the conversation. When it does come to that, please raise your hand. We do have a microphone and some wonderful people helping us, making sure that everybody in the room can hear your question. Okay, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chigozie Obioma in conversation with Maya Jasanoff.
Okay. Well, Duncan, thank you very much for that introduction. I will say 2 things. I've only published 2 books and a half. So this one comes out in June, as a joke. But we actually, Maya has a different idea. She wants me to read later. Or should I do it now?
It's up to you. We can lead into it.
What do you think I should do? Okay, let me read. Duncan has.
All right.
A 6'5" foot man has asked me to read. So
Yeah.
I am too scared
If Maya asks you
to read later. Okay, you know what? Thank you very much, by the way. It's an honor to be here and to do this with Maya. I didn't think that we were going to be friends because at the beginning of the Booker Prize thing, like everybody's all nervous and all of that. And I felt like we didn't get, along too much. But later on we did. Anyways.
Nice to meet Chigozie.
I'm just kidding. There were some disagreements. But
Definitely disagreements, but all in friendship.
So that was my answer. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm a bit of a dramatic guy, so I don't know if you don't mind, I would like to read while standing. Should I do that? Okay. So I started from theater, so I guess that is still the spirit. And, thank you everyone for coming, braving the weather. I was thinking it would be like Greece here, but ignorance. Okay, so this novel is, I'm very bad at talking, at giving a synopsis of my work, but the best way to describe this is that it's about two characters. One of them is witnessing the entire novel unfold, or entire story unfold, in 1947. And the other character is actually experiencing, is living through the war from 1967 to 1970. So someone asked me recently, can you describe how time works in this novel? And it's very strange for me to say that 95% of the novel happens in the future, while only 5% happens in the present. Is that an accurate way of describing it? So anyway, the voice you hear is from the point of view of the seer, the other character. It has taken some time, but it occurs to Kunle that he's been existing in the significance of his own presence, like a thing without anchor. And now he begins to see things, a refracted light spreading across a distant plain, its reflection brightening up the face of this world. On a track that runs as far as the eye can see, beings are floating in different directions, and from somewhere comes the toll of some unearthly bell, so loud and overwhelming, it feels as though he's been plunged into the core of the sound itself. He clamps his hands over his ears and steps away from the place. And when he can no longer hear the bell, he looks about, and the horizon spread as far as the eye can see is covered in painterly rows of purplish blue light, as if it were an imagined world, something in a picture book. Again, he wonders, what is this place? He searches for any trace of what this place might be. Where's Agnes? Where is the front? Where is his comrades? The war. He's covered in dirt, leaves, blood, and mud. There are cement stains beneath the zipper and on the legs of his trousers. His heart leaps. Has his comrades seen this? He looks about himself. The stains must have come from one of those daring times this past few days when he made love to Agnes hastily in some patch of the bush in the midst of her shelling. And every time Kunle had touched her, he'd felt his soul descend a secret stair into a bunker, sheltered from all the torments of war. He notices now that his right boot has been torn, and he can see the top of his foot, and the rest of it is robed in dust. His trousers are so dirty and caked with flecks of mud, he wants to take them off and wash them. He hears a distant cry, and looking up, sees nothing, and for an interminable stretch of the plain, nothing stirs or makes a sound. When he moves, his feet produce a sound that echoes and tumbles into some vast, endless void and sets off little muffled detonations of sound all around him. It is clear to him that this place is not the world he'd come to know all his life. Here, one's footsteps echoes and occupies space, and what one sees becomes a thing that is irrevocably seen and whose form soon changes. Yet he feels whole, alive in some mystic way. He becomes conscious of some change, a growth of the mind, as of a child coming into the recognition of new things. And this realization alarms him. He's dead. In the time it takes for the thought to take shape, he finds that the place has changed, and the world that only a moment before had been hesitant to come into being has suddenly become fully realized.
Figures like him are scattered all over the plain, all gazing at themselves standing on a terraced path beside a large pot containing some colorful plant with a strange stem carved in several places. He motions at one of these men, but before he can move his feet, a bell tolls. The uniforms of the two soldiers is seen are worn and torn. One has the tag LVII still on the shoulder patch below the rising sun badge. At first, the two men do not regard him, immersed in their discussion, and their voices penetrate him and lodge in the core of his being. I blame him, or the older soldier in his late 30s perhaps is saying. Me too, I blame him. If he didn't start shooting at his own men, we will have returned and regained our courage, the younger soldier says, gesturing at himself with a sweep of his hand from his chest down to his waist. Just look at me. Look at me, eh? What will anybody say, that my own commander killed me? Chai. Arid a war. My brother, it is sad. It is very sad. Kunle can see the air visibly flowing from the direction he's just left, carrying with it small, shiny transparencies. It is a sight so brilliant and extraordinary, he feels his heart lodge. And the two men, as if used to the phenomenon, continue their discussion unhindered. Once I saw he was shooting at your people, the older soldier says. I ran back. In fact, I load my Mark IV. I ran and see opposite me, there was that Onitsha main market. And Godo men, they tall well. I did not even cock my gun before I hear, whoa! And I feel immediately, that bullet for my chest here. The hole the older soldier has pointed to is large, like something shot through with a 7.62 millimeter cartridge used in a Brent-Light machine gun. Light stretches rod-like through him to the other side, forming a small circle on the ground behind him. Kunle remembers his own moment of death, how he'd fallen and how slowly black edges had grown around the field of his vision. He'd felt pain in his head, and his mouth had been saying words he can no longer now remember. And he'd felt his body yielding to something, like his entire being was being dragged into some unfamiliar realm. The next thing he knew, he was here. Should I continue? Yeah, I think, yeah.
Well, you say 2.5, but I think that when people read this, they'll feel that it's more like 3.5 because of the accomplishments of this book. And I'll just repeat pre-order, June 4th, 2024. Chigozie said to me, he hopes everyone here is going to pre-order. So,
I hope.
So this book does all kinds of things, which made me think about things you've done in your earlier books, which I hope we can talk about, but it does one big thing that's different from your earlier books. It's set in the relatively distant past, 2 moments in the past, and it's set in a period of historical significance, the period of the Biafran War. It's about the Biafran War. What made you write about that? Why now?
Okay, well, so as a kid, sometimes I think my mom didn't like me very much, but because of how I pestered her. But she did. She's a sweetheart. But I was very inquisitive. I would ask questions all the time. And I assume that is, now looking back, probably was one of the reasons why I ended up doing this. So in 1993, there had been an election in Nigeria. So, so Nigeria had successive military regimes, these are actual dictators. They had absolute power. It was a thing that repeated itself almost every few years. One day the entire nation will tune in their radio and a guy would just come on with this. It's off again.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, and sorry, okay. So a voice comes on and says, hey, I'm now the military leader of Nigeria. The constitution is hereby abolished. This is abolished. The parliament is suspended, and he becomes a power in himself. Anyway, so one of the despots, Babangida, under pressure from the US and other countries, decided to kind of convene an election. And so he had a guy who was his friend run against this other guy who was from the South, MKO Abiola, who I write about in The Fisherman. Long story short, Abiola wins the election, but the despot doesn't like that he did, so he annulled the election. So, so the thing is, I don't have a pocket, so I don't know. Let me see. Let me just hold it.
Welcome to the world of wearing women's clothes and trying to have these things, as some people in the audience will know. This is meant for the tie wearers.
Yes, you should have one maybe for so that I don't go and wear this fashionable stuff and then okay. All right, so it led to a crisis because there was a kind of a protest and riots. And my family was living in the West, so we were from the East, Igbos. And because of the trauma of the war, that was at the time only about 15 years ago or 20 or something like that, all the Igbos just went back to the East as a kind of a thing of caution. So we landed there in the night, and the following morning, people were coming. It was a village, my dad's village, to say hello to us. And I noticed that most of the people who were coming had some form of deformity. There was a guy who was probably like, so I was at the time, I was 93, I was maybe like 6 or 7. But there was a guy who was not that much older than me, I think, maybe 10 or so, who was like missing an arm, There were just different forms of disabilities. And then there was this lady who must have been early 20s, with half of her face eaten up by some like dreadful disease. So I asked my mom, I said, why are these people like this? And she said to me tersely, the war, So I never forgot that. And over the years, I just, I became very inquisitive. I began to read about the war. I just knew I was going to write about it someday. It was really just when I would find that courage, because if I was going to write about it, I wanted to not write what I term like a wartime novel. Which is really what you have. And that's another reason why I wrote the book. I found that even though this war was of such consequence, where 1.3 million people died just on the Biafran side, and you had, some analysts say that more small weapons were used than in the Second World War combined, like hand grenades, rifles, and whatnot. There really isn't like an internationally recognized war novel. By this I mean a novel that follows the men and women into the trenches, All Quiet on the Western Front kind of a book. So I wanted to write one, and that is why what this book is for me.
At the heart of the book, you mentioned in your preface for the reading that it's set in 2 different time periods, but it's also the idea of the doubling comes up all the time, right? The central character, whom you heard Chigozie refer to as Kunle, is known by another name to his comrades. He's a person of 2 languages, like yourself, East and West together. What does this kind of central figure let you do in this story? Why were you drawn to that kind of person?
Well, so one of the things that I said to myself that I would always try to attempt is, in fact, before I say that, let me say, for those of you who write other forms, I see some wonderful novelists here, Leila, Namwali, and is Claire? Okay, I haven't met before. So I believe that the novel is the greatest art form. Forgive me if you write poetry or something else. And and the reason I say this is obviously I'm biased, but I feel like it's the type of art form that by its name, anytime you engage with it, you should try and find a way to do something new with it. Because any form at all, if it doesn't renew itself, becomes atrophies at some point. So I said to myself that I will always try to find, even if it's an illusion of originality, I would make that attempt, to always find a new way to tell the story. So that has always been something that I always have at the back of my mind. The Fisherman, I sat with it for years until, I went home to Nigeria and my younger brother, because I just wasn't satisfied with, the telling it from the point of view of anybody, like first person or third person or whatnot. And so I remember my younger brother was about 9 years old then, and I was so tired, I was trying to take a nap, and this guy was telling me about his friends. Oh, this boy who beat me is like a Superman. That our neighbor is like a rabbit. They run so fast. And I was like, wait a minute, that is it. That is the form I was looking for. So what does a 9-year-old boy or 8-year-old boy do? He doesn't have the sophistication to understand the world, the complexities of the world. So he tries to understand things by association with what he already knows. So if he knows animals, then, or comics, if a huge guy bullies him at school, then it must be that this guy is a Superman. So that's how I found that form. So I wanted the same thing with this story. I had the plot and all of that and the character in my mind for like years and years and years, but I just didn't have that new window into the story until I met this veteran who told me two things. I spent like an entire day with him, maybe 7 hours. And he told me about how during one of the battles, one of his friends under his command they believed that he was killed, because the guy was lying there. So they were being shelled. But for like hours, he didn't move. He was just lying on the other side of the trench. And they truly believed that he was dead. But like 2 days later, they see him, walking about. So he told me that was a near-death experience, that guy truly, and he told them stories. So that's, the section I read. So Kunle is killed halfway through the novel by a shell, and he dies and comes back. So so how do you tell that story? Was the question. Second, the veteran also told me something. At some point, as he was trying to talk about this very difficult experience of the war, he said to me, it's an epigraph now in the novel. He says, in fact, let me read it because I don't want to quote him when I can actually just read it. But these are his exact words to me, even though it was said in Igbo. I've just translated. So he said, we can only tell the story of Biafra as if it did not happen, as a speculation or a riddle, or something that may yet happen, maybe a vision, as fiction, or even as a prophetic warning. So that gave me that window that I was looking for. So what I've tried to do here is to have a character who is a prophet who can see the future. So he's in 1947. Nigeria has not even been formed. Nigeria is not a country yet. There's still the Union Jack everywhere. It's still under the Governor General is British. But he's able to see this vision of the war, of this guy who is not yet born. And so almost like it hasn't happened yet, and it can be prevented. So that is what I'm trying to do here. I'm not sure how much success I have had, but the thing is, I always start out with this vision that is very large, and I think I strive to realize, if I realize between 50 to 60% of that vision on the page, then I consider that a success. So that's what
I can't wait to see what it's like when you get 90% of your vision.
Impossible.
So, this conversations you describe, even the childhood visit is so gripping. Historical fiction, as you know, it's a genre, but it's also a kind of thing that, there's a lot of fiction set in the past that we don't characterize as historical fiction. What was different for you, though, about writing this kind of novel from the others? How did you research it, beyond these sorts of conversations? Did you feel kinds of constraints with it that you were unused to feeling with your other writing?
Yeah, it was the most difficult book that I've ever written, and for the very fact that I had to do research. I didn't fight in the war. I was born in '86, 16 years after the war ended. So it's a cliche that people do not talk about wars, people who have actually fought it. But I would argue that the case of Biafra is absurdly even so. Two examples. The guy I was talking about, my dad has known him for like 25 years, something like that. He's our family tailor. All my Christmas clothes growing up, this guy made. But my dad had no idea that this man, not only did he fight, he fought like in the entire 30 months of the war, was a commander. He just never even hinted at it. Another thing, I was on the phone with a friend of mine in California, and we were just talking, and she just said to her dad, her dad was in the kitchen, and she said, hey, my friend is writing, her dad had read my first novel. He's writing another book, and it's about Biafra War. And the man was like, do you know that I fought in that war? So his daughter, who has known him for like 38 years or so, did not know this. It was over the phone. So they just don't talk about it. So it was very hard to get these people to find anybody who was willing to share information. So what I did mostly was I read basically everything you could find on the war. Some people were very nice to me. I went to the Red Cross in Switzerland. They let me into the archives. So I did a lot of that. But the thing with my writing is, or my approach to writing is, I have a hard time working with actual research material because I just like to trust the imagination. So I ended up not even like, so I would just look at the dates because I wanted the wars to be, the battle, to be accurate. So what I ensured that I got correctly was the logistics, what type of weapons were used, the times, the place. And then I just worked with my imagination basically. Because I feel like there's constraints, if I were to write about this moment, what I find is that the very obvious things is what I get, the color of your, my friend with the nice sweater, which I wish I can steal, or someone nodding their head, or the color of the flowers. But if I restrain myself and I decide that, okay, I'm going to recreate this moment tomorrow, when I know for sure that my recollection would not be perfect, impossible. What I find is that the unobvious things begin to trickle in, and that's the stuff of fiction, you know. The guy with his scar on the side of his face, you know, those weird things just come to my mind. So even though I did research, I'm not sure how much of it actually went into the book, other than like, you know, and at the end of the day, I gave a historian friend of mine, please just make sure that I'm getting the dates correctly and stuff like that. So, and he looked into that. I think the novel that I did more research on and actually used most of that material was Orchestra, because of the religious thing, you know, the worldview. I didn't want to like fictionalize the work, because it's actual belief of the Ordinary, of the Igbo religion.
Your books have a kind of quality of chain reaction, right? Something happens near the beginning, and then it can be what appears to be, like a chance encounter on a bridge, right? Or, an encounter with a madman by a river, something like that, right? And then everything cascades from there. And this book has that quality as well. I was thinking about that as a historian and how we describe chains of causation and circumstance. And I don't have a great insight about this, but I thought I would like to hear what you think about propulsion and plot, and how maybe sort of causal connections or chains operate to move a plot.
Okay. Well, I always, so I feel like the good thing with being early in your career is, and I considered myself very early because I've only written 2 books plus one that is coming out, is you learn on the go, you know. So I figured out something that I didn't even think I knew. And I've written 2 novels before. Only recently, maybe a year ago, I think that what people are mostly interested in is, in reading fiction, is actually relationships. You know, it is connections, disconnections, and reconnections. You know, like, yeah, I was telling you earlier, like we get, some of us get riled up with the Colleen Hoovers of this world because, you know, they just fill up the bookstores, and we struggle to sell books. But there's something that romance writers have actually figured out, and that is the idea, the fact that, you know, people are largely interested in relationships, and they write not just about relationships, but intimate relationships. You know, this is why 50 Shades of Grey can have the worst type of prose, but 1 billion people or something insane like that actually read that book. So I I'm more interested in that now, how people connect, whether by serendipity, the meeting with a madman. But even before that, I often try to explore the extremes in people. So I am interested in, you talk about propulsion, a kind of psychological and emotional evolution of a character from one extreme point to the other. So in The Fisherman, how can a brother who loves his brothers at the start of the novel and can do anything for them, by the middle of the novel wants to kill them? You know, so love has morphed not into even dislike, but hatred, violent hatred. Same thing, Orchestra of Minorities, you know, a lowly poultry farmer who gives his prized possession to save this woman on the bridge. By the end of the novel, he's vindictive and deranged, you know. So that evolution is very interesting to me. How do people change through this series of encounters with others? Again, a character in a novel cannot, I think, say, as human beings can, I think, therefore I am. But I think that if they were to articulate their being, their existence, it would be something like, I experience myself through these others, therefore I am, something like that. So the interaction between people is what leads these characters into these drastic changes, whether it be an encounter with a madman or, in this novel, Kunle is transformed from being this auspicious student, law student, at the beginning of the novel. By the end of the novel, he's a battle-hardened soldier, who has seen so much, and so that transformation really is what I'm very interested in. That in that a lot.
I guess what I was curious about, though, is that there's a kind of, I mean, what I'm about to say makes a lot of sense in light of what you've just said. There's a sort of lack of intent in a lot of what happens, right? Kunle is, sort of thrown into all these things. Like he's just like, suddenly someone puts a uniform on him, And I wondered, I guess like the question would then be, is there something you want to say there about how this huge historic event happens that then nobody wants to talk about? There's something in that seems to me very suggestive.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, see, he has nothing to do with the war.
Right.
So he's a Yoruba guy. I mean, obviously his mom is Igbo, but he goes on this quest to rectify something. So I feel like there's always a wound, at least in my. There's always something that someone is trying to rectify. This is how I approach the novel. Perhaps because of, early in life, I read a lot of Shakespeare for some reason. It was the books that my dad had. So people are always going to make something of themselves. So he goes into this and he becomes he becomes roped into something that is beyond him. So I think that's an intervention of some kind of destiny. There's something there that is almost as out of one's control. So I think a lot about the question of, I'm very interested in spirituality. I know you're going to talk about that later, but I'm very interested in how what the meaning of existence really is. Like if you narrow things down, my mom would tell you, for instance, that this moment is not a coincidence. You might think, okay, well, it sounds like it is. I mean, Duncan just woke up and it decides that, okay, I'm just going to invite this guy here. But no, she would argue that it was preordained, From the beginning of time, I was going to meet all these beautiful faces, So and there's something there. I don't believe that there is obviously I'm more of like a westernized person now and all of that, a bit more rational. But I also believe that there's something about that I try to at least realize in my novel. So there's room, I would say, for coincidence, for things that people are not prepared for. They just come to you. It's a case, especially in An Orchestra of Minorities, which is told by this Chi figure who is trying to make this case, on behalf of his host. It's really to say, look, some of the things that this guy has done were not his own doing. So agency, of course, this is a novel, and the novel is primarily Western in its orientation. The arc, a lot of people have talked about this. There has to be agency and all of that. But sometimes certain things are predestined and there are powers that you are fighting against that sometimes will vanquish your effort.
Yeah, and that's incredibly powerfully realized in the idea of projecting all of this as the vision from 1947, right? So about the seer figure and the role of figures of this, spiritual spirits, sometimes, and in this case, a seer in your fiction. We've talked before about how manifestly introducing this kind of dimension or element enables a lot in fiction. It's full of possibilities. It also has risks, and we've read things that, don't do it so well. And I'm just wondering how you manage that balance for yourself.
So I try to. So I believe that I'm trying to. There's a movie that I think changed my life, or the direction with which, how I write. As I said earlier as a joke, but it is true. I started out as a playwright. I wrote a play when I was very young, and I had the luck. It was, played on Akure TV at the time. But then I saw a movie which is in Yoruba. It's now a very famous film. It's a classic. It's called Tioluwanile, which I should translate as "the earth belongs to the Lord" or something, or God. And in that film, there are two different dimensions of consciousness there that work in ways that is marveling. So basically, the basic bare bones of the plot is that you have a clique of 4 friends who are educated and they've been to university, and they no longer believe in quote-unquote superstition. So they see a land in this village that has been over centuries dedicated to this deity, this shrine, this god, and they dismiss it. They're like, oh, our people are so stupid. How can you allow this land to just waste? So they connive and sell the land to a group of prospectors who are trying to start a petrol station. And the moment they sign off on the land, they go to bed, and all 4 of them have the same dream. There's a guy in a white dress, a kind of a spirit, chasing them, and with a machete. And if this guy catches up with you, you do not wake up. So one after the other, 3 of them die in the same way. They sleep and they do not wake up. So the 4th guy can no longer sleep. So he sleeps on trees. He's finding all kinds of ways so that he doesn't die. At the end of the day, of course, he cannot overcome that. And, so I look at that story and I'm like, that is not magical realism. No, there's no magical thing that happens. Dreams are weird anyway. It's a domain of the surreal. If you dream of things that are not surreal, then I don't know, you're weird. But the interesting thing is that that other domain of the mystical has actual effect on the physical. These men are dying, and this is the reason why they're dying. They take autopsies and they can't find anything. So I call that mystical realism. I'm writing this whole thing for I'm just writing, I think, Lit Hub or something before this book comes out. So in all 3 novels, I've tried to do this thing. So there's no magic, but there's a spiritual plane, a kind of a mystical plane there. So the madman and the fisherman, for instance, some people will say, oh, it's a work of magical realism, but I ask them, okay, point at the magic that is there. Nothing. It's different from a Garcia Marquez novel where a guy can get stabbed and the blood floods an entire city, which is impossible, or people are flying with wings. But there's also something about the power of that prophecy that comes true, that you cannot divorce from the reality of the thing. So that's what I'm trying to do. So, Kunle sees flashes of this man who is in 1947 and dreams of him. But his reality is rational. You can understand everything he does in its own right. He's living in this time. He mates with the sea at some point, and not to give anything away. But really, you can the mystical is part of the novel, but at the same time, you can separate the two. So that I'm trying to do something like that, and I'm finding it difficult to articulate what I'm doing, but I think you get the gist. There's something about this spirituality that hovers over the characters.
So one thing that we were talking about before and has come up in our conversations over the years is the landscape into which you publish your books, which is, of course, an international marketplace, but you've lived and worked in Nigeria, you've lived and worked in Cyprus, now you're living and working in the United States. You've written about 2 out of 3 of those regions, and your work has landed in different ways in different places. Can you talk a little bit about how it feels to be, in particular, I think with this book, to be writing it, from the U.S. when it's so emphatically, about this important and yet obscured historical event in Nigeria?
Well, simply because I cannot write about elsewhere. I'm incapable of doing that. I've tried to write about America, I can't. Partly because, it's a cliche now, but you live there. So there's not that distance. And also, speaking about how books land in different places, so first of all, there's this question of who are you writing for that people always talk about. And when I was much younger, when my first novel came out, a lot of people were saying all kinds of things, and I got involved in the conversation at the time. Partly because I was trying to be very honest. The fact is, I don't understand that question at all. I've never, and this is true, thought of an audience when I write. It's just not, for some reason, I'm just too busy with the world of the book, the universe, that it doesn't occur to me. The only thing that I'm interested in is, in terms of who reads the book, is this plausible? So those technical questions, okay, who wants to read about a madman who is just running around naked and shouting prophecies? And the questions of for whom you write, believe it or not, just never occurred to me until people brought it up. So I will say that I'm aware, and at the time, I was just more annoyed than anything and hectoring and shouting, oh, why are you saying this? I saw it more as an accusation. The way I see it now is that I still don't really think of that, but I am aware that what I write about will interest certain groups of people more. And who that interest depends on the book. For instance, An Orchestra of Minorities, you will think that it would be interesting for most people in Nigeria, most Igbo people. And the truth is, yes, it is. I can't count the number of people who have said, oh, my name is Chi something. But I never really knew why it was that. But now I understand. And the intention behind that book was that it would be a kind of a monument, if you wanted, because, we're Christians and Muslims mostly. Colonialism in most of Africa, especially in Nigeria, was a civilizing project. So the religion was wiped out. In India, for instance, you still had the Taj Mahal, the Hindu, Buddhist religion, for the most part, was not too disrupted. But in my mom's village, for instance, it was only her dad, her family that were still clinging to Ordinary. Every other person was a Christian, and they were seen as, like terrible people, like, what outcast, sort of. So I wanted to monumentalize the religion, the basic tenets of it, by writing that book. But on the other hand, there are some people who will say to me that, why are you writing this thing that is old-fashioned? We should be looking into the future, that kind of thing. And they're very dismissive of that. So even if I said, okay, I'm writing for Igbo people, but many Igbo people are not interested in this, and I don't blame them. I mean, they are Christians. They see the religion as a thing that is backward anyway, and this is how they believe, what they genuinely think. So I don't really consider that very much. But what I found, last point on this is, over the years, I have come to understand that different countries read my book in different ways. So I was in Spain, and it was an epiphany that I had in Spain in 2016 for the translation of The Fisherman. And we had this press conference. There were like about 6 or 7 journalists, because we couldn't fit them all in. The book was translated into Spanish and Catalan at the same time. So, and for like an hour, they were asking me questions, and not a single person talked about the book. Not one. So at some point, I stopped the conference, and I asked the translator, I said to him, has anyone read this novel? Am I a politician? Did I come here to... Because what they were interested in was, all these people who are coming to Spain through boats. What is happening in Africa? What is this? How is the economy? And I'm answering all these questions. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I just wrote a novel and you're asking me. But you can see why. They are receiving all these immigrants, and they want to understand these people who are coming here. Who are they? What is bringing them? So, but you go to France, the UK, they are more interested in the aesthetics of the book. The prose, what it's doing. You go to Nigeria or parts of Africa, how is he representing us? Is he writing bad things about us? You come here, you're a black man. What are you doing with race? They open the bar. It's not about race. Okay. So there are different questions. So this is what I've found. Like, different places read you in their own way. And in some ways, actually, the Western Europe, the Scandinavians, it's probably where I'm bred, I feel like they just talk about the book. They're genuinely interested in, this is a story, this is a novel, is doing this, is doing that. They don't ask me about these extraneous things. I'm not saying that they're better readers, but this is where I've found that they just look at the book mostly, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Chigozie one more question, and I'm priming you and the audience. We're going to pass around a microphone in just a minute for any of your questions. But, we met, of course, reading all of those novels together, disagreeing in a friendly way, and agreeing on a lot of them. But you were writing this you were, trying to work on this while we were reading all of those novels every day for the Booker Prize. What did that experience teach you about writing?
Number one, so we read like 160 books over a period of 6 months. And I thought I would go insane at some point. And, it was, even though I looked forward to every end of the month, right? Like when we met and convened. But it did 2 things for me. Number one, it gave me a grasp of what my contemporaries are doing. I read a lot of people who are writing now who might never, there's only so much that you can read. I try my best, but so I read a lot of people. And I realized, remember, we had this conversation. I didn't even know that the, how do I phrase this now? The changing point of view, where you have like multiple characters, like one character does chapter one, like it switches, was a thing that was now very common. Like maybe, was it like 30% of the novels we read was doing that? And I was shocked by it. It was as if I was living under the rock or something, So it opened my eyes to what my contemporaries are doing, and I appreciate that experience for that. It probably taught me how to read faster, because you had to do that. And then last one was that it made me appreciate how lucky I have been. Because, if you're writing a novel or any book, I assume, and you have even the faintest idea that you'll be nominated for anything, not to talk of the Booker Prize, I think you are insane. You should check your head. Because the breadth of what people are producing is mind-blowing, and it's a lot, it's a lot. It's not one book, it's not 10, it's not 20, it's like on count, like just in the hundreds. So, it gave me that, because, twice I've been a finalist for the Booker Prize, and you don't really know what that means, really, like the hurdle to get there. And that gave me a perspective, so that is another thing. So it kind of, now I appreciate it more, I'll say.
All right. Well, I'm sure the audience has lots of things to ask you about. The microphone is going around.
Thank you very much, Chigozie, and the professor has asked you very many questions. I would like to ask a question about your last statement. So the first two books were nominated for this big prize.
The what?
The first two books were nominated for this prize. So how did that inform the process of writing this new one? Was it a lot of pressure on you, or yeah?
Yeah, as I said, I wasn't thinking about it. I can't. I try not to. Well, should I? Is it possible that every now and then you have that anxiety, or will this be a flop, compared to the two books? Okay, well, it comes, but I don't dwell on that. What I try to do, as I say, is setting out to write a book. Often we have this vision. I'm a big picture guy. I draw out a map, and all the big things I want to do, all the ways in which I want to make this new and all of that stuff. And at the end of the day, I do like only 40% of that. So I just try to stay with that vision, Plus, don't forget, as I said before, I've kind of had this novel in mind for a long time. I would even say before 2015, before The Fisherman, it was in some form or the other. So, in fact, my process is that I have a book, an idea for a novel, and it goes through this kind of fermentation or gestation period in my mind, in which I resist as much as I can the urge to put anything down. I let it stay and stay and stay and stay and stay, sometimes for years. And when I feel it's ready, at that time, it's easier, because I've been thinking about this like almost every day for like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And then, so the process of writing doesn't take that much longer after that. So that's really what I do. So answer to your question is that no, I don't, maybe subconsciously there's some pressure, but the pressure is more like I want to sell books. I want everybody to pre-order. I want to
Nicely done.
be on the bestseller list than anything else, yes.
Up in the back.
Thank you so much. My question is based on what you've said about this new book, which we haven't read but will, starting in June. And is there a different kind of truth on the other side of death? And you've mentioned the prophecy and the power of it. And I wonder if the power of prophecy comes from its accomplishment or from somewhere else.
Well, so that's what I try to explore in my first novel. Because, there's a lot, Nigeria is and most African countries are very religious. So many people it was a common thing. A pastor will come to, visit, and we make all these prophecies. I remember one guy who said to me years ago, I was like maybe 15, and he said, "You're going to marry a princess, the daughter of a king." Okay, I didn't.
Your wife isn't here to hear that.
Well, I guess she's a different kind of princess. So it's a thing that people do. And again, people believe this thing. It's real to them. Whether I myself don't believe it or not is immaterial. So what I try to realize is on the page is what my people truly believe. I try to make concrete. So what is the power of prophecy? Is it true that the boys in the fishermen, it is the spoken word that propels what happens to happen, or is it just these boys acting out, this masculinity, this that every child anywhere can, every boy can? I'm not sure about that, So I don't know the answer to that. Speaking of death, my mom did not go to school, but she has this wisdom from growing up in this household. Her dad was a priest of Ordinary, the Igbo religion, and she said something to me. I asked her, okay, I'm writing about the war. And she said to me, well, you can go ahead, but the thing you have to remember is that the main product of war is death. But what ends up happening is that the people who tell the stories of a war are usually the survivors, those who live, the living. But that she doesn't believe that the story of a war is complete until it's told by the living and the dead. So this is, for me, one of the reasons why I've created that whole thing, So Kunle goes into this world for a couple of days. He's comatose, and he sees in the scene that I read, he meets these people, and he interacts with them. And many of them are dead, and they tell him stories of other sectors of the world that he's not privy to. So, yes, so that belief that she said to me, and I know that most of those things that she says are things that she's heard from others. They are like this grassroots knowledge, almost anthropological kind of wisdom.
Hi, thanks very much for writing this novel. I'm looking forward to reading it. My mom is from the border town in eastern Nigeria, and she started running away from the war from day one, so she was displaced. I just want to understand why you actually wrote this book. Is it to become one of those the war novels that we already have, like Chimamanda's Half of the Yellow Sun? There'll be also one written by Frederick Forsyth and a whole lot of others. So what do you want us to take away from this book? I mean, what motivated you and what central message do you try to pass?
Well, I think I touched on this a little bit. Thank you very much, for that question. I think that there's a paucity of books, of novels on the war. So what I find is there are troves of nonfiction account, memoirs, from people who fought, but mostly civilians who are, who lived through the war. Forsyth, for instance, was a journalist, a British journalist who was there embedded. Even Kurt Vonnegut, American writer, was in Biafra for a long time. But they really, and you mentioned Half of a Yellow Sun. That's not a war novel in my view. It's a great book, by the way. It's a wartime novel. What I've tried to recreate here is the battles. I want, speaking of motivation, part of it is wanting to write about the war, but also, in the moment, in Nigerian politics today, there are people who keep calling for secession, there's a guy who has this almost like a militia group, and he thinks that the solution to the problems of Nigeria is, for Biafra to come again. Which for me, I'll say that, Nigeria, I don't think that Nigeria is working in its current form. I don't know if we need to split the country or whatnot, but this is what some people believe. And some people are thinking, we can fight a war again. But the thing is, they don't really know what exactly happened there. One of the things you'll see in this novel is the daily routine for number one, Biafrans did not have weapons. This was one of the tragedies of this war. They were fighting with nothing, with bare hands. And for most of the units, you will find 2 or 3 men with one rifle, with like 5 or 6 cartridges. What they were hoping for was that they will be able to, somebody would die and they will get the weapons from there. So you can imagine going and facing tanks, artilleries, with your bare hands. There's a scene, the fall of Enugu, the first capital of Biafra. Really, about 500 people with stones and machetes went to face the Nigerian 1st Division, the best division in the Nigerian military, with tanks, with stones, trying to stop them. So the futility of it is part of the tragedy. So the human cost of it is so dire and so great that I feel like so many people, again, because we don't talk about this, and there hasn't really been, even the memoirs do not really go. So the one thing, and I hope this doesn't turn you off, is, it's very graphic depiction of the violence of the war. So I feel like, we need to get that picture of it. So this is also one of the motivating. In fact, maybe 40 to 50% of the novel is battles. Is this guy trying to survive shelling from 5 a.m. to like 1 p.m., non-stop shelling, non-stop. And just one shell can deafen you, like your ears literally burst. These guys will stay, men and women, not just men, in this place for like 7 hours enduring this thing. So I feel like if somebody actually knows what it means to fight, they will think again. If they have these interesting ideas, I think, So this is one of the hopes, and In fact, the Nigerian publisher is going to put out a billboard, as the book is, coming out. It says something like, if you think that war is something like that. If you think war I can't remember exactly, but the sentiment is that if you read this book, then you'll think again, something like that.
Thank you very much. So I'm actually looking forward to reading it too, because the topic of the war is something that's,
She's done a documentary on it.
yeah, I have. So, but my question really is the experience of your research, and you also talked about looking into the Red Cross archive, which, like you said, I did a documentary on it, and just a peep into it kept me days of sleeplessness. I couldn't think well. I couldn't sleep well. It was so traumatic. So I know you talked about your imagination, and I look forward to reading the power of your imagination after your research. But my question is, how did that impact? Is there a link between the research you did, the archive you looked into, and what your world of imagination on the other side produced? Because imagination sometimes also comes from experiences. So how did that play out for you?
Well, Maya obviously loves your question. As I said, I did use the research. Obviously, the thing is, especially with the Red Cross, the images, they have these photos. They sent a lot of doctors there. Actually, because of the Biafra War, was the reason why Doctors Without Borders was formed. That was the genesis of it. Because of, the what people saw. There were a lot of doctors, and I spoke with one of them. So I got these stories, and I figured them together. I think more is a process of putting things together that I did. But yes, the trauma was there, and there are moments that I would even recreate in my novel. And each time I get to that point, I'm kind of shattered, basically, mostly because I know that they actually happened. One of the things we suffer from in Nigeria is a kind of collective amnesia. And I don't mean this as an insult. I think it comes from being very religious. Africans tolerate a lot of things, stop, they say price hike of anything, or even retirement age, and French people will burn down the country. You can do anything to the Nigerians, and they will just be like, okay, well, it's fine. By God's grace, we'll survive. So, they protest, obviously, but it would take a lot before Nigerians do that. So we kind of forget, we love to forget things, and this is one of it. So one of the guys, our immediate past president, for instance, is a war criminal. He headed, from my research, he fought in the Biafra War. In fact, we've had successive presidents who have been commanders, Obasanjo. So Buhari commanded a unit that went into, so they wanted to break into this town, and this renegade Biafran unit, with almost nothing, stopped them for 2 months. So they ran out of everything. They got very mad about that. So when they eventually made their way in, they lined up all the males in this town, Asaba, and executed them. They shot everybody, even 10-year-olds, boys. If you were a male, you were killed, and some women as well. And this man was in that unit. I know for sure he might deny it, but it was 1st Division. It was under Shua. They were the ones who did this. And Nigerians elected him president twice. You know, a guy who should be in jail. So I feel like stuff like that. So I write, you know, there's a scene of that in the book because it's very actually disturbing, but it happened, you know. So I have kind of tried to have as much fidelity to those historical moments as possible. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes. I think it's it. Okay.
Last question.
Last.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure listening to you. I think the last time I listened to you was when you came to Ghana. Some time back. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, what do you think about the future of writing and AI?
And AI, I'm an idiot when it comes to this AI thing. I know nothing about it. Yeah, I mean, someone sent me an image about the lawsuit that is going on. Leila, your book was trained on it. I saw you post about it. Okay, yeah. So apparently, you know, my first novel was trained on some AI shit, but I'm not sure what it was exactly. Look, I've not really looked into it. I know at Wesleyan, it's a big thing. They talk about AI every day. Are you like checking what your students are producing? My hope would be that AI will not be able to write the road to the country, you know. But I don't know. I will tell you that the rate at which it's advancing is concerning, especially with you know, someone generated a photo of Obama recently and sent it to me, and I would have sworn 5 years ago that it was Obama, you know, in this position. Now, obviously, it's a malicious photo. You know, he was kissing a dog or something like that, or a goat. You know, some right-wing person is posting it to denigrate him. But it looked very real, you know. So I feel that I'm more concerned about that. Like, people can print maybe your passport, you know, and impersonate you and actually travel. So stuff like that, I'm more worried about that than AI interrupting writing. But I have heard that in Korea or something, someone wrote a novel, right? Did you hear about that? And won a prize and actually admitted that part of it was done through AI. So I don't know. I hope not. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Maya.